Hi friends, so there's just something I wanted to say briefly, and it's about something I've noticed online, which it's in social media and on various sites, whether they're big leftist sites or smaller ones. There seems to be, but it tends to be on larger ones, there seems to be this like a sort of a putting different people who are leftist journalists or leftist celebrities or whatever, I don't know, putting them up on this pedestal, and then when they start to go awry, meaning they start to promote something in a bad faith way, if that ever happens. I have seen it happen a little bit, but those people sort of out themselves fairly thoroughly when they do that. This is not a great example because, but for example, say Democracy Now!, when Democracy Now! Started promoting sort of regime change type stuff in Syria, or that they completely ignore any real critical analysis of the whole Russiagate thing. That kind of thing. There's been some other problems too. I'm not even sure if they really do much analysis of what happens in China. They just seem to present things like the Uyghur Muslim issue without any critique, and you can find a good critique on the Grey Zone of that whole Uyghur Muslim genocide thing. But when outlets like Democracy Now! Start going off the rails, there are people that are just so caught up in, say, Amy Goodman, that they refuse to acknowledge that that's what's happening. And there is no sort of there's no critique of, say, Amy Goodman and Democracy Now! And why they might be doing that. And the same thing goes for, there was another, what I thought was a leftist site. Well, at least one person I thought on this particular, sort of site was a leftist journalist. And they started going off the rails at some point in a really bad way. And I really liked them a lot. But when I started seeing them going off what looked to be even like a grift, a right-wing grift to the right, that's not okay with me. And even though I really thought they were really good on anti-imperialism, the fact that they kept going off and going further and further down the rabbit hole with a right-wing conspiracy theory with no real evidence made me sort of abandon that particular site. So, and I really like that particular person, their take on their anti-imperialism and anti-war position. But it's just gone too far down that rabbit hole and too far what looks to be a grift to the right. I'm not going to really talk about who that is. You might guess, but I mentioned them about 2 months ago on this on Faint Signals from Vega, and then they started to go pear-shaped. It was probably 3 months ago now. And I just don't mean pear-shaped once or twice. I mean consistently, and it just sort of went off. And that's when I thought, no, it's time to say goodbye to that particular leftist site. If you could still call it leftist, really. But, let's just say for the sake of argument, we'll call it that. So anyway, and when I mentioned, when I mention, say, for example, Jimmy Dore, like I did yesterday, and I mentioned that he was probably naive with that particular person that he interviewed from the Boogaloo Boys, Magnus, that he probably didn't do enough back research, or maybe he just couldn't be bothered, I don't know, but he didn't do enough research with that Boogaloo Boys person and Magnus, and I think that he made a mistake there. And if you can, and the same person that I put in that video, a clip from Abner, Hauge, that's his last name, Hauge, I think it is, who is from the Left Coast Right Watch, and he actually does a lot of investigation into right-wing groups, including the Boogaloo Boys, and he gave an interesting take on the Boogaloo Boys and their public relations that they are doing and infiltrating the Black Lives Matter movement and basically rebranding themselves. That's what he found out through a Discord server where a whole channel was devoted to public relations. And that's why I did that particular video, because that was important information that I don't think Jimmy Dore had before he did that. But also, there are a lot, as the Abner Hauge said, there are a lot more people who, even if this guy Magnus was some sort of unusual character in that Boogaloo Boys. Most of the Boogaloo Boys know exactly what they're doing and exactly what their group means. And I'm not going to go into that here again, but you can watch all of the his commentary. The Status Quo today did an interview with him, which I thought was really good. It's about an hour and a half. So I'll leave a link to that in the information section, and I'll leave a link to it in the live chat when I play this, because it's important for us to realize, and it's very valuable having sites like this, Left Coast Rights Watch. It's a very important type of thing to do, to keep an eye on these particular right-wing groups. And they had some really interesting takes. He had some really interesting and important information in this hour and a half interview that Status Quo with Tina Desiree, what is her last name? Tina Desiree Berg is the name of the woman who was doing the interviewing. So please check that out, because it will very clearly point out that the Boogaloo Boys is very problematic. And even if Magnus is some sort of outlier in some sort of unusual case, it's not like that with the rest of the group, the rest of that movement. So back to Jimmy Dore. But my point of this particular video is that I've noticed on lots of live streams, even on Jimmy Dore's live streams, that people become, they sort of basically, the person who they like can do no wrong. Like Jimmy Dore can do no wrong for a lot of there's probably about 40% of people in the live streams. If you say anything at all against him, Jimmy Dore, or sort of have any kind of criticism, and it doesn't have to, it's not ad hominem. We're not talking ad hominem criticism, like real valid criticism. And I always try to avoid ad hominem attacks. They're pointless, and it shows people have no argument when they resort to that. But there will be people in that live stream and in other live streams of different personalities that cannot seem to hold two thoughts at one time. They can't seem to hear a criticism of a particular individual's work without going into a frenzy of a sort of absolutely being highly offended. It's as if you criticize them and did an ad hominem attack on them. They can't seem to bear any criticism of a person that they think is really good. And it's not even a criticism of that person. Really, it's their work. Maybe one particular take that they've gone and done that is problematic. And that is really, that worries me, that people can't, once they have their particular person that they're standing, they, if they started going off the rails, I'm not sure that particular those particular people who are holding this person in high regard, whether they would probably go down that rabbit hole with them. And that's how cults happen, and that's how far right movements happen too. Where people just go along because they've decided that's their group, and no matter what they do, they're going to go along with it. We can't be like that. I'm saying that this is something I've noticed, and it seems to be, and I'm sorry to say this, but it seems to be an American phenomenon, that there are people who they decide, well, Jimmy Dore is great, so you can't say anything at all criticizing anything that he does, and if you do, you're this and you're that, or any other person. If we're going to have any sort of movement, we have to be able to critique ourselves. Like, I'm sure I've said things that I'm sure I've made mistakes in facts, in sort of factual things, and also I'm not a journalist, but I do things I'm not intentionally trying to lead anybody astray, and I don't think Jimmy Dore is trying to lead anybody intentionally astray, and I think I made that very clear in my last video, that I think it was naive of him, and I really sat there when I was watching that video with that interview with Magnus, as did a few other people, and it was head-scratchingly, I thought, wow, what's going on here? Because it just didn't seem real to me. But I was thinking maybe I'm wrong, like I always like to have in the back of my mind that just like when I was fooled by, by corporate propaganda about the DPRK, I was completely taken in for a long time by corporate media propaganda, and it was breaking the set with Abby Martin that's helped snap me out of it. But I was completely taken in up until like 2 years ago by DPRK propaganda. I'm talking about anti-DPRK propaganda by the corporate media. And I realized that it was nothing like what the corporate media were presenting it as. Nothing like. And I was horrified that it's so pervasive, that I was so taken in by that. And I was really worried about the people in DPRK. I thought there was all, up until a couple of years, 2 or 3, sorry, it's probably 3 years ago now, I thought people were being cannibalized and stuff there because there was nothing real coming out of there, real information. And that's really crazy that I felt that. It was at 3 or 4 years, I don't know. But anyway, it was in recent times, was that I realized that when I was interviewing John Preisner, who had been there to DPRK and didn't have a guided tour, and it was totally different to what is presented in the corporate media. John Preisner is Mike Preisner's brother from the Empire Files, and he is from ANSWER, the ANSWER Coalition. It's an anti-war coalition. He went over there. So anyway, I'm rambling again, I'm sorry, but what I'm trying to say is that it worries me that there are people on the left who latch on to a particular individual, journalist or whatever, and cannot and then completely drop their ability to critique what the person is saying. And then if they start to go off the rails in some ways, in a permanent way and in a bad faith way, or even just, I don't know, but it usually ends up being a bad faith way. If they end up doing that, that people won't let go of that person. They will defend and go with them down that rabbit hole, or grifting over to the right. They will go with them. I was probably naive about 4 years ago when I started following Debbie Lusignan from Sane Progressive, and she was doing some interesting commentary. Then she went right off the rails and started promoting, that everything is a false flag, meaning, that all the different mass shootings were all false flags, and then started showing herself as quite racist, saying that Ajama Baraka and the Black Alliance for Peace were being racist for not allowing her into one of their meetings, even though they invited her to lunch after, and it was supposed to be for black people only. She couldn't hack it, neither could her friend, Claudia Stauber, and they went right off the rails and started making all these kind of racist videos and stuff. Well, I mean, I really liked her. I even made a donation to her, and at the time. Now, I was kind of very naive politically at that time, but she seemed to have some good takes on things, and wasn't sort of partisan from what I could see. And that was sort of probably not my best choice of people to follow, but she was actually doing pretty well for a while there, and then went right off the rails, and now she's completely removed herself from speaking, which is probably a good thing considering what she was doing toward the end. But that was difficult for me to suddenly see her go off the rails like that, and then I sort of thought, okay, well, I can't follow her anymore. I can't, and what I'm saying is that, like, even if there are some people I mention regularly, there's journalists that I met. Now, she wasn't a journalist, Debbie Lusignan, and turns out, she's actually admitted that she has some mental health issues, and I think that was a part of what happened to her. So I'll just put that aside. That's separate from what I'm saying here. But, there are certain journalists that I mention regularly on this channel that I regularly mention. There's a small core bunch of leftist journalists. But if they started going off the rails, like in a consistent way, and it looked like it was in a bad faith way and in some sort of nefarious way, like as if they were starting to get some funding, like probably, say, Democracy Now! Has gotten, and that's why Democracy Now! Goes off on, doesn't critique the Syria thing or the Russia thing properly, and even the China thing, because they've probably got funding from somewhere and they can't do it, they won't do it anymore. If that core group of journalists that I regularly mentioned, leftist journalists, started going off in a direction similar to that, on a consistent basis, and it looked like it was sort of nefarious or whatever, then I'd have to drop them. As much as I highly respect them and everything, I would have to drop them as much as I admire them. Because ultimately it's not about people. It's not about individuals, and it's not about putting people on pedestals, and it's not about standing anyone. This is life and death stuff that's happening in the world today. Life and death stuff where these propaganda narratives are killing people. Like this whole Russiagate thing that the corporate media has been going on with for 4 years, and Hillary Clinton still wants to carry that on. because she can't accept that she messed up and is also trying to cover up for herself, but she's also, it's all part of this warmongering towards Russia. Well, this is leading to a hot war. A hot war. It could lead to a hot war with Russia, which would mean probably a hot war with China too, which means mutually assured destruction. These are no small potatoes, these narratives, this Russiagate and now this Chinagate stuff, which the right is going to start putting on Joe Biden to make sure that he keeps, that he does definitely warmonger against China. Not that I think he needs any encouragement, because look at Anthony Blinken. Anthony Blinken's right on board here, the Secretary of State, with warmongering against China and Venezuela, and, you know, the list goes on. And he's a complete Zionist. But, you know, these narratives are dangerous and they lead to the deaths. Look what's happened with the WMD lie that George W. Bush put out about Iraq. Millions dead. And it's still going on. And a country almost destroyed. And that's why, you know, it'll never be about the individual journalist or whatever, no matter how much I respect them and stuff. It'll never be about a group, a journalist group or anything. If they start going off the rails in a real way and start pushing sort of imperialist or US national security state narratives and that kind of thing, that sort of thing, then I will not be able to follow them, because this is, as I say, this is life and death stuff. Propaganda creates life and death situations for people and causes mass murder. It causes mass violence in other countries and in our own borders, the anti-Chinese propaganda, the anti-Asian propaganda. People are suffering in that way too. So anyway, so if I critique, you know, Jimmy Dore or whatever, I do it in good faith. I'm not critiquing him as a person. I'm talking about like the naivety when it came to the interviewing with Magnus, the Boogaloo Boys. And you know, as I said, if he started going down that road of sort of where it looked like he was, and I'm not saying he would do that. I actually think he's got good intentions and he's an anti-imperialist, and that is so important. Anti-imperialist, anti-war activists are incredibly important, because there's not very many of them. So, but, you know, if anybody at all went off down some weird road in an intentional way, then I would have to say goodbye to that person. And I would also give a little critique. And I'm not a journalist, but, you know, I care. I'm an internationalist and I care about, I've got a little cat on who keeps pushing my hand away, keeps pushing the microphone away. My concern doesn't stop at my border. My concern for the lives of people. And also, you know, I mean, if somebody, like the Grey Zone did something that I didn't agree with a couple of months ago. And it was about the planet of the humans. There are some factual problems with that article. I'm not talking about their critique of those individuals in the green movement. I think that they're problematic, definitely, but there was some factual problems with that. I think that might have been out of their wheelhouse. You know, I don't think that was a very good article, and also I really I don't understand this vilification of Greta Thunberg. So far, I haven't seen that she's some sort of evil 17-year-old evil genius that's trying to. There are a lot of leftists going off on her. And when she starts kind of protecting the fossil fuel industry and becomes a complete partisan who's just... I mean, I know that they're trying to draw her into some partisan thing, because that's what these politicians do. They try and co-opt everything. But I'm not going to get into trying to defend Greta Thunberg, but I'm just saying, I mean, I don't know everything about her. I don't know. There might be problems with her. Who knows? But there are things that you know, I don't agree with everything that I didn't agree with that particular thing that the Grey Zone did. But does that mean I write the Grey Zone off? No, not at all. There'll always be. If I wrote off everybody who did something that was that I didn't agree with, well, there'd be hardly anybody left. Not nobody, but there'd be hardly anybody left to follow. So it's okay. But I'm talking about when sort of journalist sites go down a really like the Democracy Now! Type of road of where you can see something has happened. You can see something has happened, they've got some funding from somewhere and now they're avoiding certain subjects, or they're putting out a US national security state narrative about it. Like that whole human slaughterhouse thing that Democracy Now! Went on about 3 years ago in Syria, which turned out to be nonsense. And they didn't even, I don't even think they retracted that. So, you know, these sort of things are problematic because they can lead to wars. When journalist sites put out US national security state propaganda like that stuff with Syria or Russia or China, these cost lives or even mutually assured destruction. That's what it can lead to with the Russia and China thing. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say because, you know, I knew I'd get some pushback by critiquing something that Jimmy Dore says, because there are people who completely stand Jimmy Dore and don't want anything to be said that's any criticism of him at all. They can't handle it. And see, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can have two. I can, for example, say, you know, that the whole stuff that was like the Russiagate stuff, even though there was some nuanced stuff in there, I can say that was a U.S. national security state narrative about Donald Trump, that a lot of it was invented. But that doesn't mean then that I am promoting Donald Trump or I'm supporting Donald Trump. And I often saw people on the journalist outlet Status Quo when those journalists there were critiquing the Russiagate stuff, that people would start going, "Oh, you're for Donald Trump." They don't seem to understand nuance. So, you know, this is the thing. And I'm sure a lot of you who already watch this channel already understand nuance, and you can hold two ideas about something at the same time. But there seems to be people that can't seem to do that. And also that they hang on to, it's like they celebrify, is that a word? Particular individuals, and cannot stand it when something that is real and that is a real critique, they can't stand it. And then they start to think you're basically saying that everything that they've done is wrong, or that you don't appreciate that person, and all of that. This sort of black and white kind of thinking, which is very dangerous, and it's sort of cultish, and it really makes me worry when I see it in live streams. Most prominently on, you know, the bigger channels like Jimmy Dore, you see people just cannot stand it if anybody says anything, criticizes anything, like when he was going down the path of Tulsi Gabbard, which she's turned out to be, and I knew it all along, and a lot of people did, that she was a grifter, grifting to the right. And there was other things, you know, she was also pro-Israel, but he let that slide. When he would interview her, he would say he would forget to ask her about Israel, but he didn't forget. He just knew that if he pushed her on that, she probably wouldn't come back to his channel to be interviewed. Well, I kept pointing that out, and I pointed out other things too, other problems. There were people that had her number long before that. But he kept hanging on to that, and he still doesn't really acknowledge that was a mistake. But there are people that just absolutely are furious that anybody criticizes Tulsi Gabbard. Furious. There's actually even a word invented by, I think it was Robbie Martin, he calls them tull cells. They absolutely, like Nico House is a complete tull cell. He's literally said she's like Jesus. He's supposed to be a leftist commentator, and it's basically, but he's started grifting to the right. But people still hang on to him, and they still hang on to Tulsi Gabbard, even though she's clearly done a number of things now, including being transphobic and introducing a bill, you know, that's transphobic, and now is sort of being on Fox News a lot, including Huckabee, and as pro-Israel, has done a speech for Kufi, Christians United for Israel, which is a full-on right-wing, rapture-loving group. She's never denounced that, never retracted that, what she said in that speech. And people refuse to look at it because they're tull cells, because they completely stand Tulsi Gabbard. And I wonder if she didn't look the way she did and sound the way she did, would they still be like that? But putting that aside, cannot bear the thought of anybody saying anything against Tulsi Gabbard. And that's what I mean. That's scary. We're really going to have to do something about that. And people that are addicted to anger stuff, like drama, the anger, and sometimes I see that in Jimmy Dore and some other, where they find the most trigger type things, the most sort of anger-provoking things, and then really go with that, and then people kind of love that sort of anger. And I understand being angry about things that are unjust, but there's this element of kind of being addicted to constant drama. Like, it's like anti-imperialism is not sexy. So then, that's so. So if you talk about that, that's not sexy. We want sort of drama. We want the low-hanging fruit type thing. Well, that's not going to get us anywhere either if we're just looking for low-hanging fruit domestic thing, like Nancy Pelosi did this and Nancy Pelosi did that, and AOC did this. And yes, I talk about AOC because she's a real going to be a real problem in the future. She is the next Bernie Sanders and going to lead people up the garden path in the Democratic Party, and she's already doing that. And she's already a soft imperialist, and it's probably going to get worse. But there are things that if we're always focusing on these domestic electoral issues and stuff, when there's people dying all over the world because of U.S. imperialism, you know what I'm saying? There are subjects that are push button things and easy low hanging fruit things, and people love sometimes to stomp on women too, public figures, female public figures. They love that because there's this theme of misogyny on social media that's completely unaddressed and acceptable, completely acceptable. Like unlike when racist things happen, people have a bit of a pushback on that. And I saw it yesterday talking about standing people. Caitlin Johnson, like, she does great blogs. She does great articles and stuff. I really think she's a really good writer. And she posted a meme yesterday, which was a bad choice to do. It was of AOC sitting on the ground, and there was two cops, and then it had a little text there saying, "I am murdered," which is a sort of a mocking of her fear when she was in the Capitol building. And I've talked about that Capitol building thing being a sort of an inside job. I mean, that was from the Empire Files, was talking about that being an inside job, and I think it was possibly at upper levels of even the Democratic Party, it was a sort of an inside job too, not only just the GOP and the Capitol Police and the even the Pentagon, all of that. There's lots of all kinds of evidence that was an inside job. But putting that aside, I think AOC had a real threat of violence towards her, and mocking her in this meme was a very, very poor choice. And there were a lot of people who are big stanners of Caitlin Johnson, and you cannot say anything against by criticizing that particular meme, which I did. I sort of said I thought this was a poor choice, and that we should not mock somebody's real threat, that they felt a real threat of violence. And she basically pushed back on that and just doubled down. Caitlin Johnson just doubled down on that and said, basically, I don't care what anybody's saying, yada yada yada. Anyway, but it's not really even about that meme. That's just a one-off. I think it's a mistake what she did. I think that was a problem. But all these people came to her rescue, came to her defense, and instead of thinking about the meme, they were coming to her defense because they were fans of hers, sort of thing. That's where people lose all sort of critical thinking, because they stand somebody over the content. And, I see it time and time again. It's just I find that very disturbing. If I started going right off the rails, I would hope people would say something to me. And in a polite way, of course, in a civil way, but I would hope people would say something to me. Or if people saw me going off in a nefarious direction intentionally, I would hope they'd sort of dump my channel and then tell people that I was going off. But I would hope people would talk to me first. I'm not saying Caitlin Johnson's going off in a nefarious thing, but I'm just saying, I worry about how people seem to just hold on to these figures, and when they do something that's a little bit off, that no one, you cannot criticize it, you can't critique it in any real way, because people are fans and have celebritized that person pretty much, and won't have anybody saying anything that is critical of them. And that is our downfall if we continue doing that. We have to be able to in a healthy way, be self-critical, and also in a in content, criticize content if something is going awry. Because there is so much propaganda now in the world, so much. And also, we don't need any more attention on us. Like they already try to find ways to paint everybody that's on the real left, not the pretend left, like the pretend left that you see online that is promoting Russiagate and all that sort of stuff. The real left, they look for any reason to discredit the real left. So if you know, like, and that's why things putting up memes like that, which just reinforce sort of like this callousness and also disregard for a person's life, for a woman's life, is a real problem. And it also feeds into that awful, ridiculous narrative about Antifa, like it's some sort of organization, which it isn't, but that Antifa is violent and all this sort of stuff. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. So this is a bit of a rant, bit of a rave. It's something that's been on my mind for a long time now, and I've been meaning to do something about it, because it's almost uniquely American, this standing of particular, journalists and certain individuals on the left and stuff, and then sort of completely they're completely throwing out any ability to critique anything, or any sort of ability to have nuance, any ability to hold two thoughts at the same time, meaning, for example, the whole Donald Trump Russiagate thing, saying that that's a problem, and it's wrong, that propaganda does not mean that then we're saying that we're promoting Donald Trump and saying that he's good. So anyway, you understand what I'm saying. So thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Viga. Till next time. Bye for now.